new to endpoint office hours, along with Garrett and Richard. So we have a few things that we want to cover here today. And so our topic of the week is going to be about the new Microsoft Teams client, and specifically Garrett's put together some great content about how to deploy it and what it means for EDU. So let's just cover. So for those that haven't been here in a while, make sure you have registered through aka.ms/EDU endpoint office hours. There will be a form there, so please fill that out. Once you filled out the form, we will then add you to the team, and then you will be available to have access to all the forums and anything that are part of the team. Let's see. And then, we just ask you during the time, make sure that your microphones and cameras are muted. And anytime that you have questions, just go ahead and please put those into the chat, and we will answer those for you. So a few things that have come out over the past week that are important since our last office hours. One is WMIC deprecation timeline. So if you're not familiar with that, that's a command line that you can use to access WMI. We've put a link there to the blog post and it talks, and that's just a graphic from the blog that talks about the deprecation of the product. So it's already in a phase where now it's not enabled by default, or excuse me. So read that. If you do have any applications that are leveraging WMIC, you're going to need to make plans to ensure that they still function, or one day they may just, if you upgrade to a newer build of Windows, they will not function. So just be aware that that deprecation is coming. One other thing that I thought was interesting here too, over the last week, is on the 26th of January, we released a new Windows 11 Inside preview build. And we usually don't cover a lot of this in office hours, but I thought it was very interesting for two reasons. And one, I wanted to bring it up. There's a lot actually in this build. So I would actually recommend that you go and take a look at it. There's a lot of new lap features for laps that are coming out that you will actually see that is part of this build. So it's going to be adding on top of the existing laps features that are already in general availability. So they've added some additional laps features. Maybe we can bring the laps PM back later this year once these features go GA, and we can talk more about them. And then just another feature was the Copilot icon that will be available in the system tray. So again, this is in the Canary build. If you're not familiar with the different levels of Windows Insider, a Canary build is like where we just put in new features. Now, does that mean that these features will translate into a production build of Windows? No, but this is a good way if you want to see if you want to see where the Windows PM team and dev team is looking to, what features they're looking to include. This is a good way to start testing, but I wouldn't use this as your daily driver. A couple of things also, last week we released the 2401 service release for Intune. So it's linked to the blog post is on this slide. So they have refreshed the UI, the devices, the main overview page has been in preview for some time. So they're going to be rolling that out. Two other things too that you'll notice as well as part of Intune Suite, two new features that were added that haven't gone GA yet, but they're on the blog post, is a device query feature that using the custom query language. If you can read about it on the blog post, this is a feature of the Intune Suite, but it will allow you to do queries of your device right there. So if you're looking at a specific device and you want to do an individual device query, there's also a battery health report in this as well. So I have not seen those in my tenant yet. So if you do have Intune Suite today, you probably won't see them yet, but they should. February 1st, we're supposed to have some big things starting to drop here in the next few days. So check back on Thursday afternoon probably, and you should start seeing them in your tenant. Also, for Mac software install, they've upped the size limit for DMG and PKG apps up to 8 GB on managed Macs. The next point is max package size has been increased to 30 gigabytes by default. So previously it was 8 gigabytes. And if you wanted to get to have that taken up to 30 gigs, then you would have to call Microsoft support and put in a support ticket. So the good news is that you don't have to do that anymore. But there is a caveat to that. If you do ever start up a trial tenant, it will default to 8 gigabytes. So just remember 30 gigabytes for production, 8 gigabytes for trial. And then one other new feature I thought was pretty neat is that if you're doing managed software updates for Mac OS and iOS, you can actually have a date and time picker for that. So there's some new settings in the settings catalog for that, which is pretty cool. Also, features in development. Currently, you can import up to 10 ADMX and ADML admin templates. They're going to be raising that limit up to 20. The Mac Company Portal Act for Mac OS is soon going to be supporting Platform SSO. So I'm pretty excited. That should be going into preview pretty soon. If you are using EPM in your environment, filters are going to be available so you can filter out certain device types or OSs based on assignment. And then there's also going to be adding some support for multi-SIM iOS and iPad OS device in your inventory. So again, that's all on the What's in Development page that you should be able to see all of that. And then with that, I will go ahead and turn this over to Garrett. So Garrett, take it away.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. I'm going to go ahead and present in Teams here. If y'all could just give me a thumbs up when you see this content. Perfect. All right. Well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. We wanted to take a moment and talk about the new Teams client because there's some timeline changes from when we initially made the announcements of new Teams coming out. And we just want to make sure as endpoint admins, you are all aware of these changes because one of the key dates is actually on Thursday of this week. So we're just going to talk about the new Teams client, the deployment of it, the management of it, a few little tips and tricks on troubleshooting and things like that. Hopefully this is just a good level set to make sure that you are all aware of what's happening in these changes that are coming down. Let me start off though and say that yes, this is office hours and we are here to support one another. However, we are not officially support, right? We don't take tickets. So as you submit those tickets to Microsoft, they don't come to us. But we do want to do our best to help you be successful in these implementations. So as you come across this, right, and you kind of live this experience of updating to the new Teams client in your own environment, you may run into issues, right? We really encourage you to submit those support tickets and let them know the issues that you're running into so we can get them resolved. The more tickets we have, the more telemetry that we have, the faster we can resolve those issues for you all. And that's not to say you can't let us know about it. Just don't always expect all the answers. So with that being said, I may not have all of the answers, but that's kind of why we wanted to bring everyone here together. And maybe we can talk a little bit about your own experiences with the new Teams client. So let's get started. First off, why is there a new Teams client? Why did Microsoft make the decision to do this? Basically based on user feedback, customer feedback of the experience of Microsoft Teams and wanting to improve it. So this new client is actually 2 times faster. Installation is up to 3 times faster in some cases. The app launch is much faster. You can join meetings twice as fast now, and even chats and channels switching between those experiences is much faster. We're also using much less resources. So memory, we actually had a third-party independent consultant come out and say, let's kind of benchmark this and show the experience between classic Teams, that's the old Teams, and the new Teams. And they did determine that it's using up to 50% less memory and even 70% less disk space. So That's great for us as endpoint admins to make sure that we're giving our end users the best and most optimal experience. And hopefully Microsoft has taken some steps to really ensure that you are having a great experience. We also have some really great features coming out, such as like tenant switching. So, as you all interact with this EDU Endpoint Office Hours community, hopefully you're leveraging things like our community questions channel and things like that. Being able to switch between those tenants and those orgs is much faster and much easier than it used to be. So there's a lot of great improvements coming out as well. And hopefully this is all in all a better experience in the long run. So let's talk a little bit. I just kind of wanted to deep dive just for a minute into the core architecture changes. So you can see in this slide that we had the legacy client, that's classic Teams. And this was really based on the AngularJS web client, and also Electron is kind of the underlying host for this engine that would power classic Teams. Now, if you've seen Electron before, you might recognize it from the old Microsoft Edge days. That was actually the engine that we were leveraging in the old Microsoft Edge. And obviously, with the new Teams, we've kind of changed that architecture to really bring in a lot of those improvements that I've already talked about, and hopefully in the long run, give us some, set us up for success, right, in the future, and all the great capabilities come out, especially all the new AI related features coming out. So on the new side, you can see we're using our Fluent design. We're using React, which is kind of that kind of similar to the AngularJS format. And then we're heavy leveraging WebView 2, which is also based on the new Edge or CREDGE or Chromium Edge, whatever you want to call it. So we have made some significant underlying architecture changes, and hopefully you can see that. With that, though, we also have some added benefits, right? We talked about the multi-account, multi-tenant switching is much faster, but we're also able to streamline the app installation. So instead of having a machine-wide installer, which is an MSI, to be used for the classic Teams, which actually didn't install it for all users, fun fact, that we actually do have a client that does it, and it is in the MSIX format, so a more modern version of the MSI format, and hopefully it's a faster and more streamlined app installation experience for you. I also wanted to call out that if you pay attention to the client itself, and this is from my own experience in using new Teams, is that I can actually open up Task Manager and you can see the resources that new Teams is running under, and it is far less than what it was in the past. However, I've also noticed that the WebView 2 processes have increased. So even though we say there's less resources, yes, the Teams resources themselves are less, but we're so dependent on the WebView 2, you might pay attention to how your clients are experiencing that. And utilizing things like endpoint analytics to kind of get you some telemetry inside your environment on how your devices are responding to this new client. So just kind of a heads up there, and hopefully I would love to see, in the chat or even in our community questions channel, just some feedback on the performance of new Teams if you're running it. All right, to jump in the timeline, and I think this was, when Richard and Scott and I were kind of thinking about topics, this was like the number one thing that we wanted to make sure that we really drill into you, that you're aware of these dates, that these dates are coming. They're non-negotiable dates. You can't really control them. We can't control them. Microsoft has set this drop dead date of when folks are getting the new Teams client. And this is obviously going to impact you as endpoint administrators. So we really want to call this out. We had previously, I want to say last summer, we made an announcement that new Teams is coming, and you would have until this summer, June 30th, 2024, to get your clients upgraded to the new Teams. We have since moved that date up. So the new date, that is a drop dead date that everyone will be forced to be moved to new Teams, is now March 31st, 2024. In 3 days, that will be next month. right? So it's creeping up really, really quick. This is especially difficult for EDU, I think, especially in K-12, because this is really starting to get into testing season and things like that. But it's really important that you understand that this is a drop dead date. You will be forced to move, all of your end users will be forced to move to the new Teams client come March 31st, 2024. You cannot control it. The admin policies, and we'll talk a little bit about it in a minute, those will actually disappear in your tenant altogether. You will not be able to control the new Teams from, you won't be able to prevent it from rolling out. So I called this out specifically in these key areas. Windows is March 31st, Mac March 31st, and the browser, so the web, if you're running Edge or Chrome, it is March 31st. We are still, we don't have a solid date for the browser for Safari and Firefox support. Our current documentation just says March 2024. It could be March 1st, it could be March 31st. I'm not really sure, but just kind of plan for March for that to be updated as well. The two key distinctions that you need to be aware of that you won't be able to be automatically upgraded by Microsoft is in VDI instances. So if you're running Citrix, VMware, AVD, Win365, those you have until June 30th, which is great. And then any unsupported OS. So that does include Windows 10 LTSC. That will be June 30th as well. So the timeline does stay intact for those two scenarios. Outside of that, that drop dead date is March 31st, 2024. And I'm going to keep saying that throughout because I want to make sure that you understand March 31st. All right. Going a little bit ahead here. The next one that I just wanted to call out too, from a service perspective. So we were talking about the client, but the new Teams as a service, it really is keeping those dates intact as well. The only thing would be for if you have any users that have those prereqs that are not met, and I'll share what those prereqs are in just a moment, but that is still June 30th. Otherwise, you'll notice that from a service perspective, for EDU, it's called Teams for Education, right? And that's just the overarching service itself. The Teams for Education platform gives us great capabilities like assignments inside of Teams and classwork and other EDU specific features. So it is kind of a designated separate service, but it still falls up under the umbrella Microsoft Teams service. If there is a reason that Microsoft determines that EDU in particular cannot be forced to upgrade by March 31st, let's say that there's a complete blocker on assignments or something like that, then there may be some date changes, but as of right now, that's not the case. Everyone should be able to migrate to the new Teams, or will be forced to migrate to the new Teams by March 31st. So I just called that out just to kind of keep an eye on. But again, if there are any devices out there in your environment that don't meet those prereqs, like VDI instances or unsupported OSs, you do have until June 30th to get that resolved. So let's talk about those prereqs. For the new Teams client, the prereqs are you have to be at least on Windows 10 version 20H1 or 2004, however you want to call it, or higher. So you have to be running on a semi-recent version of Windows 10 in order to get that. If you're on anything below 2004, that is not supported. And this does exclude, in this particular case here, Windows 10 LTSC. So because we're leveraging the MSIX format and getting those apps directly from the Microsoft Store in a lot of ways, and we don't have support with that with Windows 10 LTSC, we will not have support for new Teams on Windows 10 LTSC. So you will be forced to use the web client in those scenarios. A couple of notes just on WebView 2 and the Teams app itself. So you do have to be on specific versions of the classic Teams app in order to see the new Teams toggle switch. Once you get new teams on, notifications, if you want to continue receiving those notifications within Teams, you've got to make sure that your notification settings within the app are set. And these automatic updates for Microsoft Teams via the new client are actually powered by DO. We had a conversation yesterday, and I dug a little bit deeper into this. We do require DO to be in place to receive those automatic updates from the client for Microsoft Teams. So make sure that you have some form of DO in your environment stood up. All right. From an Office perspective, because Teams is deeply integrated into the Microsoft 365 apps for enterprise, we do have some prereqs on the Office channel that you're on. So if you're running semi-annual channel or monthly enterprise channel, you want to make sure that you're on one of those builds that's listed there or higher. And then same with Office LTSB. Hopefully, most of you are at least exploring our new Copilot offerings. And so you know that you need to be on the current build for Microsoft 365 Apps for Enterprise to take advantage of that. Right? Same kind of concept there is that a lot of great capabilities to integrate with the new teams. We want you to be on the latest version of the M365 apps so that you get not just feature updates, but security as well, right? So again, in order to have those deep integrations, and I'm talking about things like the Outlook add-in and the presence support, etc., you do need to be on a supported build of Office. All right, here is where I wanted to call out specifically about what's happening in a couple of days. So today is Tuesday, January 30th, 2024. On Thursday, it will be February 1st, 2024, and that is when Microsoft will start pushing out banners to all classic Teams users about updating them to the new Teams client. This is really an informational and kind of give a little push, some encouragement to go ahead and update to the new Teams if they haven't yet. But you will have end users that will start seeing this yellow banner in their classic Teams UI if they have not updated. This banner is not configurable by IT, despite our best efforts, right? Obviously, as IT, we want to be able to configure this or brand this or kind of link to something else out. You have no control over this banner. You can't control it. So don't ask about it. You just can't configure it. You can't disable it within the tenant or anything like that. That is going to start appearing for those classic users on February 1st in 2 days. So be ready for that. Prepare your help desk and help make sure that everyone is aware that they will start seeing that. There will be a link, obviously, right in that banner to switch to the new Teams client. So assuming that you're not blocking it by any policies or anything like that, then those end users can switch automatically. So that leads me to the admin experience. There is toggles directly within the Teams admin center to control that behavior for allowing your end users to upgrade to the new Teams. So if you go into the Teams admin center, and I'll actually just share my screen really quick because I've got this pulled up. If I can get my Teams client to work. It's thinking about which screen it is. It may not work. Probably because I have my camera on. Well, inside the Teams admin center, you will have, there's a new section. If you expand the Teams navigation on the left-hand side and go to Teams update policies, which is not new, that one's been there for a while, but there is a specific, when you click on the policy for global, or if you're targeting those specific policies to groups in your environment, when you open up those policies, you'll see a new area that says use new Teams client, and you'll have some options there to be able to upgrade your users to the newest Teams client. So you have not enabled. So if that policy is there for not enabled, then users won't see that toggle switch directly within the app. If you see classic Teams as default, they'll see the toggle, but it's going to default to classic Teams. So that's kind of the user controlled method. They could switch it as they need. Microsoft controlled is the option where we will go ahead and trigger that update automatically for you. And then new Teams as default is you saying, no, we're going to force this in our environment to these specific users. So if you have your champions group or your pilot users, other instructional coaches getting ready for trainings, things like that, you'll want to flip that toggle to that. So that's kind of the overarching policy. Again, if that's not enabled, then your users cannot upgrade automatically themselves. Otherwise, you're in full control there. We also have bulk installers, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment, and offline capabilities for deploying this client out through whatever mechanism you wish. Hopefully it's Intune at this point, otherwise you wouldn't be here. But if you're still heavy reliant on Configman, then you could do that too. Or if using another third party, then that's certainly an option. Now, I talked about these policies, but it's also important to understand that these policies that we define within the Teams Admin Center, come March 31st, they're gone, right? They will not be in your tenant anymore. You cannot leverage them. It becomes Microsoft's responsibility to get you updated. So, leverage those where you can. I would start flipping users or larger users over to the new teams over this next month, the month of February, to get them there before March, because March 31st, those policies will not be in your Teams Admin Center anymore. You cannot rely on them. Cool. So let's talk about the few different ways that you can actually deploy the new Teams client. Number one, we already kind of alluded to it. It's that in-app switch directly within the classic Teams. This is end user driven. Again, that policy can control, the policy within the Teams Admin Center can control that toggle switch and how your users interact with it. I like this one and having it on user controlled, or what they call classic Teams as default, just to allow your end users to switch back to classic Teams should there be a reason to. So that's a really great one for them to try it out, give y'all feedback, give us feedback. If we need to resolve something, then we can do that. The next option is a manual install. So again, we've got that MSIX package now that you can download directly from Microsoft and run it. And then we also have what we call a Bootstrapper. So this is the third option. The Teams Bootstrapper is actually just a wrapper. It's going to download the latest MSIX whenever you run that. So there's a few options. We'll talk a little bit about it in just a moment. But that one's kind of nice for admins to leverage. The final option is to deploy this with the Microsoft 365 apps. So if you are deploying Office in your environment and you're leveraging the Office deployment tool, you know that you're probably familiar with the configuration files that you create, so the config.xmls, to kind of define that installation behavior for M365 apps. Right now, as of this date now, because we're a little bit into this process or in this journey, when Teams is selected to be on, that is the new Teams. So classic Teams does not get installed when you do a fresh install of M365 apps for Enterprise. If you turn it off, obviously, you won't get any Teams at all. It doesn't default to classic by turning it off. It just doesn't install Teams at all. So note that we've made that change. And then I also want to call out that if you want to prevent that new Teams client from installing with Office, there's a new option in the M365 Apps Admin Center, which you can get to at config.office.com and sign in with your GA account. And in the deployment configurations, there's a new option to turn to opt out, basically, of that new Teams client. Again, that won't be there very long. I don't know that I've seen a specific date on when that part ends, but I would assume that it's around that March 31st date as well. So again, I wouldn't leverage it unless you absolutely need to. But just something to be aware of if you're deploying Office for any fresh builds going out, any imaging that you might be doing. All right, let's dive in just a moment into the Teams Bootstrapper for Windows. So this is actually an interesting application. It's a lightweight headless command line tool that you can use to install the new Microsoft Teams client. And we actually call it kind of provision. And this is actually going to provision Teams for all users on the machine. When you run this Bootstrapper, it will download that latest MSIX file from Microsoft, and then it will install whatever the latest one that we have available out there for you. So this makes it really nice for us as endpoint admins when we're deploying this through a command line or a central deployment tool like Intune or Configman, right? All we have to do is create an application or a package and call it teamsbootstrapper.exe, and then use the -p or -p, which stands for provision, by the way, to install that newest client. All you have to do, you don't have to manage that update, kind of from here on out. You just have to package it one time and always get the latest Teams client, which is really nice. And again, this should install it for all users on the machine. There's also some additional parameters, which we can do things like offline installs. So if you wanted to download that MSIX file that we talked about independently and then leverage this Bootstrapper to do an offline install of that MSIX file, you absolutely have the capability of doing that. And then we can use this same Bootstrapper to uninstall new teams if we need to. So that one's actually a -x to remove new teams from that machine if you need it to. And now that the company portal supports uninstall applications, that's really handy. Oh, and by the way, like the same thing, right? If you wanted to wrap this up inside of a Win32 app inside of Intune, make an Intune Win file, all you have to do is put that Teams Bootstrapper, just wrap that one itself. And then as the program within Windows or within Intune, you'll just do Teams Bootstrapper.exe-p to provision that new team. So that works pretty well that I've tested within Intune. And then the same concept, right, for any application or package that you might create in config now. I have not tested on any third-party solutions though, because I am Microsoft. All right, so just a quick note on new teams for Mac. So we do have some prereqs for Mac OS as well. Mac OS needs to be on Big Sur 12 or higher. Again, similar constraints around that classic Teams application. We've got to be on a specific version in order to see that toggle switch. Should your Teams admin center policies allow those end users to upgrade by themselves? We also have some recommendations for once you get new teams on the machine, you'll want to be able to adjust those notifications as appropriate. You will need admin privileges if you're going to do this at a user perspective, just individual machines. But we also have a new Teams PKG file, and with the new advanced PKG options within Intune as well, you should be able to deploy this out to your Mac clients that are managed with Intune pretty easily. The other call out that I wanted to make around this was the Microsoft Auto Update. So if you're familiar with applications or managing Microsoft applications on Mac OS, you know that there's a Microsoft Auto Update component to update the Office suite itself. That is going to carry over with new teams as well. So you want to make sure that that's configured in your environment and on your devices as appropriate. Now, there is one quick note in our docs. I threw it in here just to call it out, that actually in EDU, and I don't know the details on this to be completely transparent with you, but from an EDU perspective, we are not recommending the new Teams client on macOS just yet. We still recommend the classic teams. So it sounds like there might be some issues that we are working through on that. So I encourage you all to at least test this in your environments and start testing new teams on macOS. If there's any specific feedback that is EDU related, get those tickets in so that we can get those resolved. So yeah, if anyone's tried it, it looks like Dan's got some it causes kernel panics. Okay. Yeah, so if those are issues that you're running into, definitely let us know so we can get those resolved. But that is not fully baked for EDU just yet. They better hurry up because March 31st is coming up quick. All right, new teams for VDI. This is interesting because we have a little bit more specific prereqs on this. In fact, I would encourage anyone and everyone to go and visit the link at the bottom of the slide that talks about new teams for VDI, because we have a lot of information around this. There's a lot of prereqs, and there's actually too much to put on one slide for you all. But I got the highlights here, I think. Again, for Windows, we need to be on specific versions. And the biggest thing that I wanted to call out was that there's a new install location for classic teams versus new teams. So if you have any antivirus exclusions or DLP policies that are looking at that file path of classic teams, you need to make sure that you update those other areas to make sure that those work appropriately on new teams on VDI. So there is a new location. However, it's all baked into one client. So we used to have a separate VDI client. We don't have that anymore with new teams. It's all one teams client, which makes it easy for deployment purposes. But there is a new install location. And we also only support new teams with the appropriate AV optimizations on AVD, Win365, Citrix, and VMware. Now, again, I would encourage everyone to go look at this link that I've dropped at the bottom of the screen. This is PowerPoint Live, so you should be able to click on this right now. There's a lot of information on prereqs for specific remote clients and things like that that we support. So you'll want to be sure to do your due diligence on the right versions in your environment that you support, so that you can give your end users the best experience for new teams on VDI. But it looks like we've done a lot of great work there, but that was seriously the longest support article or doc article around that. All right, just a few more slides and then hopefully we can have some great conversation. Known issues. This one has come up a number of times through customer conversations and other office hours. That specifically for Windows, there is some installation issues that you'll want to make sure that are resolved. So there are some particular registry keys out there that are preventing the use of new teams or preventing the installation of new teams from occurring. So block non-admin user install, allow development without dev license, and allow all trusted apps. If those are set to disabled, then new teams installation is going to fail within Windows. So at one point back in October, I believe, or prior to October, there was an issue where new teams was not installing in Windows. We had to actually release a KB specific to resolve the issue. It was around the all trusted apps reg key where it wasn't set correctly, but it was disabled for some reason. And so we actually had a CU come out to resolve that issue. So you'll want to make sure that your Windows devices are patched with at least that CU before new teams can be upgraded. In some cases, we've even seen customers pushing out policies to disable that altogether. So you will need to at least set those to not configured in order for new teams installation to be successful. My testing, I don't want to say this blanket statement, but my testing saw that if you just temporarily disabled it, you could install it, or I'm sorry, set it to not configure temporarily. You could install new teams. You could set it back, and it wouldn't affect teams currently installed, but I don't know what that does to updates. So again, just kind of use your best judgment there. If there's continuing to see issues around that, let us know. I'm really interested to see who's run into this or who might be setting these policies specifically, or if you have a particular business case around setting those policies. But again, because of the new format of new teams, that's we've at least identified those policies that could prevent it. So heads up there, and I would be interested on y'all's feedback. All right, at this point, now that you know the different ways to get the new teams client, this is what it looks like. It's a lot prettier, it's a lot faster. You have this new icon in your start menu or taskbar, wherever Teams is pinned, and it has the Teams logo that you're used to, but it now has a blue banner on it that says new. Some people like it, some people don't. I don't really care. It adds more color to my taskbar, so I'm cool with it. But you'll also notice that when you install new teams, classic teams might still exist. And that's okay. There's no technical requirement to have classic teams removed before new teams gets installed. Kevin has a really good question about when will the new Teams app, that banner go away. I have no idea. We have not made an announcement on when it'll go away that I've been able to find. So stay tuned. I'm not sure. Very likely after June 30th, I would think, but we'll see for sure. So there's no technical reason to not have both installed. Once you get the new Teams installed, it should automatically default to the new Teams experience no matter which Teams app you open up through Start Menu or Taskbar or what have you. It should prompt you to launch the new teams. If it's a user-controlled behavior, it may prompt you to switch back to classic teams. Otherwise, if it's policy defined where you're just going to go straight to new teams, that UI will respect that policy. So it'll just default to the new teams, which does help from a user education and adoption perspective. In some cases, I have heard reports, nothing, official or approved, but this is why I wanted to call it out to you all to kind of test and let us know, is that in some cases, if you have a classic Outlook, right? Remember that we have a new Outlook coming, but classic Outlook with new teams, and classic teams gets removed, that could cause some issues around presence and things like that. I haven't seen that be widespread. There's no official reports on that, not from a Microsoft perspective at least, but something to watch and go through as you're testing and kind of make sure what that experience is for your users. So right now I say just keep classic teams loaded side by side. It's totally okay. And it really does give them an option to switch back if there's a valid reason to do so. All right, and so then that leads us into, well, once we get new teams and we've decided that, hey, we no longer need classic teams in our environment, or Microsoft decides for us that we no longer need classic teams, how do we get rid of it? To really, because right, it's a security best practice to clean up any unused software. We don't want that floating out there for a long time. But we also want to make sure that we're cleaning up the entirety of teams, right? And so we do have some sample scripts within our docs that you can leverage to clean up the classic teams and uninstall classic teams from the box whenever you're ready to do so. Again, you could use any deployment method you want to. You could make this an app. You could deploy it as a PowerShell script. You could use a proactive remediation, however you want to do it. But we do supply you at least a couple of samples around this. I've also seen some really, really awesome community scripts out there. So if you just use your favorite search engine or have Copilot write you an uninstall script, in most cases, those should be sufficient, but from a Microsoft perspective, I'm going to stick with what we supply. So use at your own risk, anything else that you might find, but there may be some legitimate scripts out there that are really handy to, maybe remove classic teams and then put new teams on all in one fell swoop for you. So, if anyone here has done that before and want to share, happy to have that in the community questions channel. But what I really want you to know is that come March 31st, we have a message center post out there that says Microsoft will actually, on your behalf, attempt to uninstall classic teams for you. So you actually shouldn't have to do anything. How we're doing this behind the scenes, that we don't know, or I don't have a lot of insight into. So, it's up to you on how you want to trust that, but it may be a best practice to kind of figure out what works in your environment to remove the classic teams at least past the March 31st date at a later time. So again, would love to hear others' experiences. If y'all have already deployed new teams out in your environment, what are some of those gotchas that you've run into that can kind of help your fellow man out in this journey there. But I also did call out here on this slide that if you need to uninstall new teams at any point before March 31st, we have documented ways of doing that as well. So definitely feel free to leverage that. This is the funniest slide that I made because this is something that we were talking about where we have new devices with an older OS. So what will happen? And this goes back to kind of some of the prereqs that we mentioned, right? That you have to have within classic teams be on a certain version in order to download the latest version of new teams or switch automatically. And so if we have devices, let's say you're going through a device refresh and you purchase some new devices and those devices have been sitting on the shelf for over a year, and they've got a really old version of Teams, how do we as endpoint administrators ensure that we get the latest Teams up on there? And so this is something that I want you to start thinking about. The likelihood of this happening is pretty low, but stranger things have happened, right? We've run into this type of scenario before, and I fully expect we will again. But some of the things that we wanted to kind of think about was, what does that experience look like? So if you are deploying those new devices, and let's say you're using a provisioning package or you're imaging those devices. If you're imaging, hopefully your Office is already updated so that it's a non-issue. That's a wipe and load scenario. But if you're provisioning or going through autopilot and you're not pushing out the latest N365 apps for enterprise, you might run into a scenario where you have a really old version of Teams. And so that initial classic Teams has to get updated in order for you then to have that switch over to the new Teams. So definitely some things to think about around, maybe packaging the new Teams client up directly within Intune and have it added to your autopilot profiles or added to those provisioning packages in those provisioning scenarios, as opposed to imaging, which is kind of that wipe and load scenario. Even with your task sequence, right? If you're just doing a provision with the task sequence, maybe you're leveraging a provisioning package inside of a task sequence. Again, just making sure all of those workflows that you have in your environment, you kind of think through that scenario to make sure that you get any older OS devices out there that may have an older version of that team post March 31st, and that you've kind of got a good solid workflow there to get that updated. All right, and the last piece here, and then we'll kind of have some Q&A or question and answer commentary. I want to hear from you all, but the last piece is the reporting mechanism. So I've got a couple examples here where you can actually get some reporting or some telemetry within your environment to see who's actually updated to the new Teams environment. How do we check how many client versions we have within our organization? You've likely already done something like this in your environment, but I wanted to call it out just in case. So again, as a Win32 app, if you package the new Teams client as a Win32 app, you can use a detection method. I give you a very super simple example here. Again, there's lots of community examples out there where you could leverage to get some good telemetry back in your environment from a hardware inventory perspective. But this one worked enough for me in my lab, so you can leverage this. Notice that the new Teams client is a provisioned app package, so you have to use those PowerShell commands. You have to use a custom detection script to do that. There's no MSI product code to retrieve or anything like that for that new Teams client. So you will have to use a custom detection script. But if you do so, then you can leverage the discovered apps within Intune at least, or inventory within ConfigMan to get that information and start building out those reports as needed. Also, from the Teams admin side, the call quality dashboard. So if you are not the Teams person in your environment, check with the other admins in your environment that may have access to the Teams Admin Center. But there's a reports section in the Teams Admin Center, and we have a source called Call Quality Dashboard. There's actually two versions of this. There's a default version that you can look at within the
Hey, Garrett, we lost your audio.
Garrett, you're muted, yeah. Well, we lost your audio. You may not be able to hear us.
Oh, did my voice stop? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, sorry about that. My headphones did talk to me, so that's probably it. Yeah, with that, lots of resources. The documentation is pretty solid. I mean, I think there's still some left to be desired for more documentation as per usual. But for the most part, we've done pretty good there, letting you all know. So here's a ton of resources that you can leverage in your journey to the new Teams client. Hopefully this helped you all and made sense. But at this point, I know we've got a few minutes left of this call, so I would love to yeah, I'm plugging for my iPhone. Yeah, I'd love for you all to kind of comment just on your experiences or ask any specific questions that hopefully we can answer. And Randall's got his hand up, so I will jump to you, Randall. Go ahead.
Sorry, one thing I've hit a problem with, and I'm actually hitting it right now. On the new Teams client, I think it may only be when I'm a guest. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. It's like I can't join the chat. So I'm literally it says chat isn't available right now. And I've had that issue on other guests when I'm a guest on that. I don't know if anybody else has seen that. So I mean I like to ask questions kind of asynchronously, and I can't do it right now.
Same.
Yeah, and in the past, if I switch to the classic Teams, I can do. I get that ability again.
Hey guys, sorry, can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I missed all of that, Randall, because I had audio issues. So, did anyone else on the team hear that question? Could they answer it, or I don't want?
Yeah, Garrett,
can-
it goes back to Aaron's problem that you and I were talking about maybe a week or two ago, where some people can't see the chat.
Oh,
And it seems like Randall's having the problem when he uses the new Teams 2.0 client, but if he flips over to the old legacy Teams client,
it works.
that works fine.
Okay.
Yeah, and I found it's hard to find online, but I've found a couple places that says I thought it was 100, but it might be 50 people. But it's like if you're not one of the first 50 or something, or first 75 or something like that, you can't join chat. So like only the first 50 people are allowed to or can get into the chat as guests.
Oh, interesting. I was thinking like maybe it was because I was logged into my university's tenant versus the Microsoft
Right.
tenant.
So you have to be guest, like you and I are.
Yeah.
But if you're a guest and you're not like in the first 50, then
Oh.
or something, because
That would make sense.
yeah,
Okay.
I've seen references where people like were in, but they had to disconnect and then they reconnected and then they no longer had access. And it was because when they were first in, they were like in the first 50, but when they disconnect and reconnect, now they're, much later.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case.
Okay.
Only because Aaron, which you can't see in the chat right now, but Aaron Hudson, who was having this problem about 2 weeks ago, he messaged me, and I don't have an answer. I don't know why this is happening.
Okay.
But he's saying now he actually has access to the chat, and he just recently joined the community. So yeah, it's not the first X number that causes it, but I have no clue as to why this for some people.
And it's not just this meeting. I've seen this in another office hours that we do, and other people have reported a similar issue, but I haven't heard what is it our side or your side, or is it new Teams client? I don't know what the issue is.
I mean, it's literally saying we're currently unable to load your messages as you are not a participant in the meeting chat at this time. Which is odd.
That's what Dan provided.
But if I click into chat in my recent history, I can see the chat in my chat, but not in the meeting. So I'm wondering also if that's a thing. If you can, Randall, if you want to try that, like go into Teams, click on the chat icon and look through your chat recent history and see if you can find this meeting and see if you can see the chat in that window.
I was able to before, but now I can't see it, and it says the same thing when I reloaded Teams.
Gary, we created a brand new meeting for this, right? For this page too.
Yeah.
So this isn't the old reuse meeting, right?
No.
Okay. Because I'm thinking maybe we could recreate the meeting, but there's really no easy way for us to even test this internally without just sending it out to everyone else and just seeing if it fixes the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of references online about these problems, but no solutions to it.
So, yeah, definitely. I'm going to say submit a ticket just at least to get eyes on it, more visibility on it, and hopefully we can get it resolved because we want it resolved.
Hey, Gary, do you know if like Dwayne or any of those guys from National Office Hours, is anyone tracking this over there?
I don't know, but I can bring it up with them. I know we've experienced it on National MS Office Hours, and that's Heather who runs that, who is Dwayne's manager. So I'm going to say there's at least some visibility there, but I don't know if they're specifically tracking anything like from customer reports. You know, do we see this from other orgs that host meetings, and you know, those guests, are they experiencing the same thing, or is it just our tenant? I don't know what the extent of it is. So
Sounds like what Randall's coming across on the internet is saying that others are seeing this, and I've got to think that it has nothing to do with Microsoft. Like our meetings in our tenant, and I'd imagine these are customers that are, you know, with other customers. Like,
yeah,
you know, it's not just, you know, joining office hours, for instance.
yeah, it's just weird that it's in two. I mean, those are the two primary large audience where we have a lot of external guests coming in.
Yeah.
So that's my only perception of it, but I'll definitely loop back. And Aaron, I know that Heather's raised this before, but we don't have an answer right now. But thanks for
Yeah, the
letting
weird
us know,
thing is I
Randall.
can see everything else. So like Q&A, I just dropped a link in the Q&A on a Reddit thread where people were discussing this this issue. So, and it definitely seems to have something to do with external users.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
This cool. Steve.
Yeah, I have two questions. One combined, and then another one. Is there a new version of the Bootstrapper come out every so often, or is it going to be pretty much stable? Number two, when I did early on, I did put it in Teams, use the /p, and when system tries to install and pull it from the internet, it just fail. I had to download the MSIX and add it to my application.
Oh, interesting. Okay. As far as I'm aware, the Bootstrapper, I mean, sure, there could be updates to it, but I think it's primarily what it is. I wouldn't expect many updates to it, whereas the MSIX, right, that will be updated periodically. What's interesting is if you download the MSIX right now from our website, it's not the latest version of the new Teams client, right, whatever the latest version of that client is. So there is a delay there that I've noticed, but as far as I'm aware, the Bootstrapper shouldn't be updated that often. So its job is to pull the latest MSIX down directly from the internet. So it's interesting that you're seeing where if you do a -p that it's not pulling that down and you were limited to that offline mode. I haven't run into that. If anyone else has, definitely let us know.
So I was under assumption that that SCCM as system couldn't download anything from the internet. That's why I was talking to my other internal guys, and that's what we were seeing. So I downloaded and created the application that way, but /p didn't seem to work. And since that time,
Okay.
there's been 2 other Teams Bootstrapper EXEs, and so I thought maybe that might be the problem. The other one I'm seeing is I've been on new teams for a while for OSU, Ohio State University, and uh, try to share a screen or join and see a share, and all I get's a big white box. And the way I get out of it is to close and exit or bring up Teams Classic, and then I can get to the screen share. So I'm seeing that
Interesting.
if I try to share a screen, the other person
Okay.
can't see, or they're sharing and I'll see it. And then another person in the group shares their screen, I get a big white box. Like we got 3 people trying to
Interesting.
share it.
Are you
Yeah.
on Windows 11 or what OS?
Yes, Windows
Okay.
11.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyone else see that issue before? I've seen green. I haven't seen white.
I see this. I mean, I was in a meeting the other night with some other fellows. They might have been on Teams Classic. I don't know, but I joined the meeting and they were sharing a screen. All I got was a white box. So I had to exit out.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to encourage you to put in a support ticket and just let us know so that we can start tracking that.
All right.
Yep.
One thing on the system context,
Yes.
do you have a proxy set up in the environment?
I'm not the network guy, but possibly. I don't think so, though.
Yeah, if there's a proxy in the environment and you're trying to do a system level download, it's possible that the device itself can't get out through the proxy. This is a common problem that we see even in the config manager side of things, where system can't go out and download things. And it's been a long time since I've had to actually deal with this, but there are ways to work around that. So what I would do is talk to your network guys and see if there's anything that would block devices from being able to go out and download through the proxy.
Okay. That might change. Well, we're moving to a hybrid. Well, the current SCCM site we're on now is on-prem only. We're moving to a new one that is hybrid joined, and we're going to use the CMG. So that might change then as well. So, okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
Hmm.
Awesome. Richard, it looks like you had a couple of things. Did you want to say anything about?
Yeah, just real quick before we
Yeah.
wrap up.
Yeah.
So there's been 2 updates. One update to the FFU process. So I put a new build out for 24.01. So I recommend everyone update to that. If you look through the notes, you can click the link in the chat. If you scroll up a few to look at the to the chat message that I posted, it's got the release notes there for the fixes that I put into that. And then I also updated the Windows EDU best practice guidance for Intune. The big updates there is that we changed the remediations from using remediations to using Win32 apps. It just makes the process a little bit more consistent when you're trying to remove the built-in Win32 apps, or I'm sorry, the built-in Windows apps that you don't want, like Xbox and Skype and all other stuff. And then also created a settings reference document that goes through every single setting that we're setting in the EDU best practice guidance. So that took a lot of work to document every single one of those settings, but that's finally done. So if you're curious or if you want to test this out, you can stand up a trial tenant, go to dev environment, or just put in production if you want. We don't deploy through that process. We actually aren't assigning any of the policies that are in that script. So what we're doing is we're just creating them in your tenant, and then you're deploying them yourself. So you can deploy them to a test group or test devices if you want. So there's nothing that would impact all of your production devices. So that's that.
Awesome. Thanks, Richard.
Yep. And we're done.
Cool. Okay, I just did a pop quiz in the chat. Joe wins a high five. March 31st. Okay, March 31st. That's the drop dead date to get everyone to new teams. So, yeah, stay strong. It's a lot of moving things at Microsoft lately.
Oh, yeah.
All right, guys, we're a little bit over. Take care. Bye.